Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I really hope that you will hear interesting information that will help you on your journey to relief. I also want to thank the Pain Society of Alberta and all the wonderful team who's put this event together. So this session will be about the cause of migraine, because when we talk about treatment plans, well, it's better when we make decisions for ourselves to understand a little bit what is going on to cause our symptoms. So today we'll talk about that. So the first thing is you are absolutely not alone. And this is very strange to me that so many people with migraine feel alone, as in fact, they constitute close to 11% of the world's population. And this is true for all countries. And 1 or 2% of the population has chronic migraine, which is the most severe form of this disease, as Susan mentioned in her beautiful testimonial. So you're definitely not alone. And somehow, migraine's been with humanity for decades, centuries, probably millennia. It's deeply ingrained in our genes, as we will see. And so it's kind of migraine is part of the pop culture. So there's always a good soul, with the best of intents, who is going to tell you something about how you could treat migraine, and they know the cause, right? So they'll tell you about chocolate or all kinds of recipes, and they mean well, but very often they don't understand exactly what you are going through, and that migraine is not only a little headache, as you are all probably aware. So it doesn't mean that you don't need to manage your stress, as we'll talk today, of course, or you don't need to hydrate, which is very good for health, but it's not the key to all migraine problems. So one motto that we have at Migraine Canada is one size does not fit all. And this is because migraine is a very diverse disease, and it has actually different causes and different mechanisms. So that also means there's no 100% cure. So if someone tells you about a cure for migraine, it's like the best way to lose weight or the best way to make money doing nothing. It's you should really greet that with a lot of a healthy suspicion. And remember that there are many different approaches to treat migraine. Migraine is not only a headache. That's very clear. It actually comes with very different symptoms. And some people might have a lot of nausea. Others will have auras. Others will have a lot of sensory hypersensitivity. So if you put 10 people with migraine together, they might share some experiences, but some symptoms might be very different. And so that regards the gastrointestinal symptoms, hypersensitivity, the location of their pain, the characteristic of their pain, the frequency of the attack, the cognitive symptoms like brain fog, irritability, fatigue. So I hope that in this slide, you recognize a bit of some of the symptoms that you might have. And I included there, of course, dizziness and vertigo that are part of the vestibular migraine that we heard about. So let's take an analogy here to talk about the cause of migraine. And some of you might have had imaging and be told your brain CT is normal, your MRI is normal. Be thankful you don't have a brain tumor and you only have migraine, which is very dismissive. So of course, if you have a brain tumor, and you don't need to go to med school to see that on the CT, the MRI on the right side on top, there's something wrong there. There's like a mass, a very strange thing in this brain that seems to be pushing. And if you look at this brain, it's obvious something's wrong. On the left side, well, you see a computer. Nobody would dream of using this computer, all right? It's definitely not totally out of order. But if you look at the computer below, well, it looks fine. It kind of looks very good. Just like the scan on the side, looks perfectly normal, right? And so this is exactly the CT you could have or the MRI you could have if you have even the most severe chronic migraine. But if you try to use this computer, it might be slow, it might crash, it might have like different software problems. And this is what migraine is. Migraine is a neurological disease. It is a problem with the brain software. And for those of you who think that we can see everything that exists, well, have you ever seen the Wi-Fi? We use it every day and it's not visible. So I know that we rely a lot on MRI and CT scans in today's science, but it's not the end of all questions. So let's dig a little bit deeper. So what's the cause of migraine? Is it really all in your head? Is it imaginary? Is it psychological? So to talk about that, we have to just picture in our brains how the brain works. So the brain is like a huge computer filled with billions of neurons. And these neurons talk together so we can perceive our environment and then act and do things. So the neurons talk to each other through two things mostly: the electricity and chemistry. So they use electrical currents and they use chemical substances. Sometimes we call them neurotransmitters. So you might have heard about serotonin, dopamine, and so on. So usually the networks work with both these ways. If you go a little bit further, well, we might just remind that our bodies are kind of coded or designed through genes. So genes are just like little recipe books to tell our body how to build our proteins and how to assemble and be the beautiful selves that we are. And these proteins are actually determine everything that is in our body, including our brains, neurotransmitters, receptors, blood vessels, brain matter, you name it. All of this is encoded by different genes. So your genes determine how your brain software works. This is a bit of just to show you the level of complexity. When people tell you there's one thing that causes migraine, this is just one sensory neuron. And it's really like a full world in itself, filled with different substances and receptor, and it's very complicated. So we have now a very good level of knowledge about how the brain works. So the migrainous brain is different, right? So you have this gene mix that actually varies from one person to the others. There's more than 40 genes now that have been related to migraine. And so on the electricity side, we know that the migrainous brain will be hypersensitive to stimulation. So this brain does not habituate. It has no dimmer. So the lights are going to be like stronger. The sounds are not going to be filtered. And that has an impact, of course, on our energy management. For those of you who have the aura, this is also an electrical phenomenon on the surface of the brain. On the chemistry side, we know that people with migraine have low serotonin levels, and those levels just go up during an attack. They also have metabolism differences about how our brain manages its energy. And then they are prone to something called neurogenic inflammation. This is inflammation that comes from the brain itself. So overall, we know that the migrainous brain is genetically predisposed to be sensitive to different triggers, and we'll get back to that. And those triggers tend to accumulate to a threshold. And after this threshold is reached, then the brain will kind of generate an attack and all the multiple symptoms that come with it. So it's a bit of a chemical and electrical storm in the brain. So most of my patients want to know, where does the pain come from? And the idea here is that people will say there's something wrong with my neck or my sinuses or my eye or my jaw. But the pain from migraine actually may be influenced by different problems and pains outside of the brain. But inside the brain, that's where the pain comes from. Inside the brain, what is painful is not the brain itself. The brain is actually not sensitive to pain. What is painful are arteries, veins, and meninges. Just think about it. If you blow it like an aneurysm, will give you an excruciating headache. A meningitis will give you a big headache too. So meninges and arteries and veins are very painful. So what happens during this famous migraine attack that's being triggered, right, is that the brain will cause a release of inflammatory peptides. That's fancy laden, jumbled medical stuff to say cayenne pepper, right? Something very inflammatory is released near the meninges and arteries. And we just said that those are very sensitive to pain. So, but this pain is kind of relayed to your brain, which interprets it as coming from your eyes or your neck or your jaw or your sinuses. So that's why the pain of migraine is felt in different places, but it comes from a process that's inside the brain. So that might explain why actually all this diversity of migraine is probably set up through genes. We don't understand all the details of that again. But some people will have frequent migraines. Others will have infrequent migraines. You can have aura. You can have different symptoms. So there's a huge diversity in the migraine disorder. There's also an interaction between our brain and the rest of our body, right? This is true for everybody, but particularly if you live with migraine. All of these diseases you see on this slide in different categories, blood vessels, psychiatric or mental health, inflammatory diseases, lung diseases, inner ear, vestibular diseases. all of those are associated with migraine. So it means that they can actually influence the migraine condition. One thing we also need to know is that sometimes people will, come to life, they will develop migraine when they're young, when they're in their teens or their young adulthood, and then somehow they will deteriorate and reach what we call chronic migraine. That means having more than half of your time, 15 days per month of migraine. And usually this will start with something. Sometimes there's a trigger, sometimes it's not clear. It might be premenopause, it might be stress, it might be a disease. And then attacks start happening more and more and more. And then what happens? You start sleeping not very well. You start being anxious. You might be depressed because your life is not that good with that many migraine attacks. Then you become tense. You have shoulder pain, neck pain. Then you start taking medications. We heard about that from Susan. You might increase your caffeine because you have to go through the day. And all of these vicious circles just turn and round and round. So this is something we see a lot with people with chronic migraine. And it just shows that the brain with migraine gets into these vicious circles. So how do we treat migraine? So that's where we all put that together. So we can approach both sides. We can say, all right, this brain has, a low tolerance to different triggers. It has a threshold. Can we raise the tolerance of the brain? Can we increase the threshold? And that can be done through stabilizing the lifestyle and using different medications or preventive treatments that will change your brain chemistry and make it more resistant to attacks. On the other side, you can also decrease the load on your brain, or the trigger load. And so that can also be done through stabilizing your lifestyle and optimizing your body and mental health. So sometimes when people say there's one cure, there's one thing to do, usually it's a mix of different approaches that make your brain more resistant and that will also decrease the load on this migraine brain. So migraine management, and today is all about giving you tools and giving you access to healthcare providers who have great expertise, and they will present to you this menu of options. So you can start with the behavioral option. So by behavior, it's lifestyle, caring for your brain and body. Then you need acute therapy to break the attacks and preventive therapy to lower attack frequency. So when you discuss a plan with a healthcare provider, always have these three big categories in mind because they are very different. And usually you need to combine these to reach success. One thing that you will hear a lot about a migraine, especially if you go to a headache clinic, is how to avoid your triggers. And of course, it makes a lot of sense to avoid triggers, especially if you have infrequent attacks and you know what the triggers are and they can be managed. But nowadays, we flip this and we turn to a more empowering vision. So instead of being afraid of the triggers or trying to avoid everything, especially when you have a lot of attacks and everything is triggering you, we go to a protective lifestyle. So we focus on protective behaviors, things that make our brain a little bit more resistant to attacks. Because sometimes just watching everything you eat, the weather, the hormones, the stress, the sleep, it becomes actually very anxiogenic. So today you will hear about all these categories. You'll hear about how to help improve your sleep, how to exercise, how to manage your emotions and stress and energy levels. So this is what we call the C's for success. This is just a way to go over the different things that can be done for your migraine. And I hope that now that you know how the migraine brain works, it makes sense to invest in such approaches. I just want to do a little pitch for the Canadian Migraine Tracker. This is an app to monitor migraine and monitor your progress. It's more simple than Migraine Buddy, which asks a lot of questions. This app is free, French and English, iOS and Android. Give it a try, and you can actually send your results to your healthcare providers. So have a look at our Canadian Migraine Tracker app for migraine diaries. And finally, well, there's a lot to say. I mean, we could do a lot of different days about migraine. We invite you to come to our migrainecanada.org website and look at the Migraine Tree. The Migraine Tree is a resource where you can look at all this menu, all these options, and learn about them and get this knowledge that you need. And sometimes I'll tell you, even give the knowledge back to your healthcare providers, because as we said, GPs sometimes don't get a lot of education about migraine. And I have patients who probably know more than the usual GP. So looking at the tree, I encourage you to explore the branches about lifestyle, acute therapy, preventive therapy, devices, injections. We try to put everything there in a simple language for you to explore and determine what is going to be good for you so you can make your own treatment plan with your healthcare provider. This is something that we actually teach to doctors in upcoming program that we will give to GPs across country. And it's just a summary of what I presented. So we would like doctors to do the following. They have to validate that migraine is a neurological disease and it can be disabling. So if you meet a doctor who's discarding you, I'll say like Susan, advocate for yourself or find another doctor. I mean, migraine is a serious condition, needs to be taken seriously. Set expectations that are realistic. So we know that there's no absolute cure for migraine. It doesn't mean to just accept everything and live with it, but sometimes you have to kind of find a better way and be aware that migraines might persist, but be less frequent or less severe. There might be many trial and errors. And this is because so far, this is a complicated disorder. It's very difficult to predict what's going to work for you or what's going to work for your friend or another sufferer. Lifestyle changes take time. You'll hear about that today. It takes patience and persistent. But I'll tell you, after 10 years of practice, that pays off. And it really is worth doing. And migraine is a neurological disease. So you can have a perfect lifestyle. You can do meditation every day, eat perfectly, hydrate perfectly, but you might need medications because of this genetic software that has to be stabilized. So, what will your plan look like? This is really an exciting journey. And I really hope that today's presentations will help you to build your own plan and show you that there's always something that you can do. So keep the hope high and get your own knowledge and discuss these things with your healthcare providers. So I thank you, and I really wish you the best on your journey to relief. I encourage you, of course, to follow us at our Migraine Canada website, Facebook, and soon to be Instagram, and to use a Canadian migraine tracker to follow your progress. Have a wonderful event, everybody, and thank you to all the speakers also who will be with us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. Amazing presentation. One of the questions that have come in is about, how do you figure out your triggers and what do you do for people who really struggle to determine what their triggers are or really haven't been able to find their triggers?
That's a very good question. And so if you have very frequent attacks, okay, just by pure statistics, some things will happen on the day where you have a migraine or the day before. And if you start looking at 15 parameters to try to determine which one is key for you, it's usually not very productive. So for people who have frequent attacks, I usually do this flip and say, you know what? Forget about the triggers. Let's focus on what we know is healthy for your brain. And the weather, you cannot do anything about it. So at some point, we have to let it go. But for people who have infrequent attacks, it's good for them to know that, like skipping meals, being dehydrated, hormonal levels, stress release, exhaustion, exercise. But usually this is pretty obvious. So my only advice would be, if you find yourself spending a lot of time on chasing your triggers and being bewildered by them, maybe give it a rest and focus on what you can do and put your brain in a safe place.
Awesome. And I guess following up on that, some of the questions coming in are a lot about how to prevent those triggers. Is it possible to, eat chocolate and drink red wine again? And are there ways to reduce the risk of those triggers?
So that's where I'll share what I see in my clinic, that when we find an effective preventive treatment, it might be anything. It might be a pill, it might be Botox, it might be a CGRP antibody. You'll hear about these. Patients get back to me and with a big smile, and they say, you know what? I can have a glass of wine, like I can exercise. So they have raised their thresholds to trigger. And that, I think, it's something very rewarding and tells us that the migraine's brain sometimes needs like external help to be stabilized and to be able to live. Because you cannot, not everybody can be a Japanese monk and eat, water and rice and kale and meditate like 10 hours per day. This is not our lives. And I've seen people go through a lot of avoidance because they want to avoid attacks, and it's perfectly understandable. But that's where sometimes I have a good discussion about preventive therapy, and in the hope that their lives will be normal again, or better at least.
Excellent. Thank you so much. One last question was about actually meditation. You mentioned that and the benefits of mindfulness. Any thoughts on that?
So I'll say the following: the full mindfulness program that was developed by Kabat-Zinn takes a lot of commitment and time. It can be very effective, but sometimes I start people, and you might comment on, we might hear from others, with just breathing exercises and what we call cardiac coherence. This is whatever you do, you have to do it consistently to stabilize your brain and have a ritual in your day. So all of these techniques can be fantastic. Vipassana, mindfulness. It can be, walking meditation. Some of my patients start like knitting. Whatever is just calming your brain and taking your brain away from this craziness of our lives can be a very, very productive and excellent. But mindfulness can be great. It's not the only option. We'll hear more about it today.
Of course. Thank you so much. Really so honored to have someone with your esteem and knowledge here with us today. And of course, being a part of everything and putting it together from the first place. So really means a lot to us. And I'm sure for all the people listening from home, there are so many options. A great review of looking at migraine itself and the biological aspects and some of the meds. And, hang in there. We're going to learn much more as we keep going on. And of course, we have some extremely renowned speakers continuing, and we've already heard from one of the best. So thanks again, Liz, and happy to hand it over to Christelle.